let's sit back and get cozy and enjoy some slightly creepy stories with me. So I have very nobly stolen someone's list that they made for Reddit from 10 years ago, which says something about how old this game is now. But someone put together a list of the creepiest books in Skyrim. Now, I love reading the books in Skyrim. The first time that I played, I would basically stop and read every single book as I came across it. So some of these I have read before, but a couple I either just don't remember or I haven't read. So I'm quite excited. So the first book that we are starting with is called The Axe Man. Suitably creepy title. And this is by Anonymous. And this, well, it seems to be a true story or a historical fiction, shall we say, in the Skyrim universe. So let us begin. Of all the members of the Morakatong I've spoken with, none disturbed me as much as Minas Toric, a quiet and reserved man who never drank, never visited a brothel, or even uttered a curse. He was famous for his ability to make people disappear. Once a person was targeted by the Brotherhood and Toric was sent to them, they would simply cease to be. I asked him once what his weapon of choice was, and was equally startled by his answer. I only like to use axes, he said in his typical quiet voice. The image of this silent, dour fellow attacking anyone with a weapon as inherently bloody and violent as an axe so frightened and intrigued me that I questioned him about it further. This is an inherently dangerous activity, for assassins are not typically keen to give out their stories. Toric did not mind the questions, though it took some time to get the full story out of him, as naturally shy and reserved as he was. It seemed that Toric had been orphaned at a very young age and sent to live with his uncle, a Saltry's plantation owner in Shir Gorad in northern Vardenfell. The man promised to show his nephew the business and eventually make him a partner when he was old enough. In the meantime, the boy was put to work as his uncle's house servant. It was a grueling life, as the old man was very particular about how things should be done. The boy was first required to give all the floors in the house a thorough scouring, from the attic to the cellar. Whenever the floor was not cleaned to the uncle's satisfaction, which was frequent, Toric was thrashed and forced to begin again. The boy's second duty was to ring the bell that would bring the labourers into the house. This was done at least 4 times a day, once for each meal, but if his uncle had any news or additional instructions for the labourers, which he frequently did, the bell might need to be sounded a dozen times or more. It was a huge iron bell in the tower, and the boy quickly discovered that he had to throw his entire body into the motion of pulling the chain in order to have it sound loud enough to bring everyone in from the field. If he was tired and did not pull the back-breaking chain hard enough, his uncle was soon at his side to beat him until he rang the bell loud and clear. Toric's third task was dusting all the shelves in his uncle's vast library. As deep and old as the shelves were, he was required to work with a long, heavy duster on a rod. The only way that he could reach the back of the shelves was to hold the duster at his shoulder and then swing it out in a sweeping motion. Again, if the uncle saw any dust left over, or felt that the boy was not working as hard as he ought to, the punishment was swift and severe. After several years, Minas Toric grew into a young man, but his job responsibilities were not increased. His uncle promised to teach him the business once Toric had mastery of his servile assignments. Divorced from any knowledge of any work other than his own, Torek never knew how badly in debt his uncle was, and how poorly the farm's yield was. In his 18th year, Torek was called into the cellar by his uncle. He thought that he had not done a good enough job scouring the floors down there, and was frightened of the beating to come. What he found, however, was his uncle packing his goods into crates. "I'm leaving Morrowind," he explained. "The business has gone sour, so I thought I'd try my luck running a caravan in Skyrim. I understand there's good money to be made, trading fake Dwemer artifacts to the Nords and Cyrodiils. I wish I could take you with me, my lad, but there won't be much need for scouring, bell pulling, and dusting where I'm going." "But uncle," said Torek, "I can't read. I knows nothing of the business you promised to teach me. What bills I do's on my own?" "I'm certain you can find a job in some domestic capacity," shrugged the uncle. "I've done my best with you." Torek had never stood up to his uncle before, and felt no anger, only a sort of coldness that gripped his heart. Among his uncle's possessions being packed away was an old, heavy iron axe, allegedly of Dwemer manufacture. He picked it up in his hands and was surprised to find that it was not much heavier than his dusting rod. In fact, it felt very comfortable as he pulled it over his shoulder and swung it out as he had done so many times before. In this instance, however, he swung it into his uncle's right arm. The old man screamed with pain and rage, but for some reason, Torek didn't feel frightened anymore. He propped the axe against his other shoulder and swung it out again. It cut a swath across the old man's chest, and he fell to the floor. Torek hesitated before swinging the axe above his head. It was another natural position for him, like he was ringing a bell. Over and over again, he swung down as if he was calling the labourers in from the field, except that this time there was no sound except for a wet thump, and no labourers came in from the field. Of course, his uncle had sent them away hours before. After a time, there was nothing left to his uncle that couldn't be washed down the cellar drain. The process of cleaning up came easily to Torek as well. Blood scrubbed up much quicker than the usual grime and sultrous flour that littered the cellar floor. It was well known that Torek's uncle was planning to leave Morrowind, so his disappearance provoked no suspicion. The house and all the belongings were sold to the debt collectors, but Torek took the axe. It seemed that his uncle had given him some worthwhile business skills after all. Interesting. I suppose that was not quite so spooky as, well, just desserts, I suppose, but who knows. Our next story is called A Tragedy in Black. Its full title is A Tragedy in Black, a folktale from the time of the Oblivion Crisis, and this is also by Anonymous. The Dremora looked on the young boy with disdain. He looked to be no more than 17 or 18, on the cusp of manhood. You have summoned me. Mother says I'm good with spells. Someday I'm going to be a wizard, maybe even archmage. And what would your mother know of magic, boy? She's a wizard. She's an enchanter at the Arcane University. Ah, another dabbler in the mystic arts. I'm certain she is barely mediocre. You shut up. I read the scroll. I get to tell you what to do. The Dremora was silent. Compulsion bound his voice. I want to know how to make a magic dress. I need it for her birthday. The Dremora's answer was more silence. You have to tell me. It's in the rules. Freed from the previous compulsion, the Dremora answered. First, you need a soul gem. I happen to have one, and would gladly give it to you for so noble a cause. Really? Why do I need it? With a hidden smile, the Dremora a soul, the more powerful the enchantment. So how big is the one in this soul gem? Oh, that one is empty. You'll have to fill it, but it can hold the largest of souls easily. Do you know how to do that? No, the young man said sullenly. Let me show you. You cast a spell like this. The tendrils of the soul trap spell spilled from his fingers and surrounded the boy. The young man's eyes went wide. I didn't feel anything, he complained. How about now? The Dremora asked, plunging his talons into the youth's ribcage. His heart beat only once before it was pulled from his chest. Quickly, the Dremora snatched back the black soul gem, just as the youth died. His soul tried to flee, but was trapped by the spell and drawn into the gem. Only black soul gems can hold the souls of men and elves. Your mother obviously never told you never to accept a freely given gift from a summoned Dremora, he said to the corpse. You see, it breaks the conjuration, freeing the summoned from the summoner. Now, let's go find your mother. After all, I have another black soul gem. Ooh, that was a good one. That was quite short, but I like that. Okay, our next story is The Woodcutter's Wife. Now this, I believe, is potentially part of two stories, so we will read both. It's The Woodcutter's Wife and Cabin in the Woods, and these are both written by Mogan, son of Molak. The Woodcutter's Wife, as told by Mogan, son of Molak. Legend tells of a woodcutter who built a shack deep within the pine forest. There he hoped to live in peace with his family. The woodcutter's family lived well for a time, but without warning, the weather turned bitterly cold and spoiled the harvest. Before long, with their meager supply of food all but gone, the family was starving. Late one snowy night, a traveller knocked on the cabin door, seeking shelter from the biting cold. Always generous of heart, the woodcutter welcomed the stranger into his home, apologizing that he had no food to offer. With a smile, the traveller cast off his cloak to reveal the garments of a mage. As the woodcutter and his family looked on, the mysterious visitor reached into his satchel and withdrew a scroll tied with a silver ribbon. No sooner had the wizard unfurled the scroll and read the words aloud, when a great feast appeared from out of thin air. That night, nobody in the woodcutter's cabin went hungry. Day by day, the snow piled up. Every night, the mage produced another scroll from his bag and read the words, each time summoning a new feast. On the fifth night, the woodcutter's wife awoke her husband to confess her mistrust of their magical guest. Surely, she argued, there was some price to pay for the magical feasts that everyone enjoyed night after night. The woodcutter would have none of it. After nearly dying from the lack of food, his family was eating well. The divines had sent them a gift, he explained, and it was foolish to question their wisdom. But the woodcutter's wife would not be persuaded. Every night she grew more fearful and more desperate. She was certain that the family had entered into a devil's bargain, and the time would soon come when the mage would ask for something unspeakable in return for his gifts. While everyone in the cabin slept, the woodcutter's wife snuck out of bed and took her husband's axe in hand. She crept into the traveller's room and with one swing lopped off his head. Suddenly, the wizard's disembodied head awoke. His eyes opened wide, and when he beheld his maimed body, he let forth a terrible cry. Awakened by the horrified scream, the woodcutter and his children rushed into the room and gasped at the terrible sight of the decapitated mage. With his last gasp of breath, the traveller laid a fearful curse on the woodcutter's wife. After her mortal death, she was damned to rise once again rising of the sun. To this day, those who walk the pine forest late at night tell tales of a weeping woman glimpsed between the trees. She carries a bloody axe, the stories say, and is terrifying to behold. Well, let us move on to Cabin in the Woods. This is part 2 of the story, potentially. The Cabin in the Woods, Volume 2, as told by Mogan, son of Molag. Late one night, a few seasons ago, a soldier was returning home after several bloody battles. He decided he would save some gold and decided to cross the pine forest on foot. The first day of his journey was rather uneventful. The soldier stuck to the main path and kept a brisk pace. When it started getting dark, he set up his bedroll, built a small fire, and cooked up some rabbit he had caught. A fine day indeed, he thought to himself as he fell asleep. Partway through the evening, the soldier was woken up by soft sobbing in the distance. He grabbed his sword, assuming it to be a bandit trick, but pretended to sleep so he could get the jump on them. After a few minutes, the sobbing started moving away from his camp until he could no longer hear it. For the rest of the night, he slept with one eye open. Day 2, the soldier awoke from what rotten sleep he could catch and started off through the forest at a quicker pace, intending to put distance between himself and whatever he had heard last night. As the day went on, it began to rain heavy, so the soldier built himself a little shelter for the evening so he could remain dry while he slept. It took him a little longer to fall asleep, with thoughts of the previous night fresh in his mind, but he eventually slept. This time, he awoke to sobbing that sounded like it was right outside his shelter. The soldier grabbed his sword and crawled out of the shelter. In front of the fire, he saw the back of a ghostly woman sobbing into her hands. The soldier mustered his courage and asked her what was wrong. No answer. He began to slowly approach, but before he could reach her, she turned and screamed at him. The ghostly woman raised an axe and began to run at the soldier, disappearing before she made contact. The soldier took off into the night with just his sword in hand. He ran until the first light of dawn, where he started down the road again as fast as he could move. The third day was bright and sunny, but the soldier, rattled and sleepless, didn't even notice. He moved as fast as he could, trying to get through the forest before nightfall. As darkness began to fall, he saw a cabin just off the road and thought to himself it would be a good place to hunker down for the night. After arriving at the cabin, he spent some time blocking the doors and windows. Nothing would get in. Despite his preparations, he could not sleep. He sat in what used to be the cabin's bedroom, staring at the barricaded door, shaking. Eventually, he could keep his eyes open no longer and fell asleep. This time, he awoke to laughing on the other side of the barricaded door. It sounded like the woman from before, but he refused to believe it was her. The soldier burst through the barricaded door into the main room to find the ghostly woman from the night before, staring at the ground, laughing hysterically with axe in hand. He began to relentlessly attack the ghostly woman, but he could feel his strikes were less effective. He used a scroll of firebolt, which drew a scream from her, and she exploded, disappearing. The ordeal was over. The ghost was gone. The soldier slept well that night, and the next day made excellent distance through the woods. As the sun began to set, he came out on the other side of the forest and looked back, remembering the days before. As he turned and started walking away from the woods, he could swear he heard the sobbing again. Ooh, that was a good one as well. Okay. Our next book is called sight, making that particular quiet night especially dark. The town guard had to carry torches to make their rounds, but the man who came to call at my chapel carried no light with him. I came to learn that Movarth Bigwine could see in the dark almost as well as the light, an excellent talent considering his interests were exclusively nocturnal. One of my acolytes brought him to me, and from the look of him, I at first thought he was in need of healing. He was pale to the point of opalescence, with a face that looked like it had once been very handsome before some unspeakable suffering. The dark circles under his eyes bespoke exhaustion, but the eyes themselves were alert, intense, almost insane. He quickly dismissed my notion that he himself was ill, though he did want to discuss a specific disease. Vampirism, he said, and then paused at my quizzical look. I was told that you were someone I should seek out for help understanding it. Who told you that? I asked with a smile. Tisina Grey. I immediately remembered her, a brave, beautiful knight who had needed my assistance separating fact from fiction on the subject of the vampire. It had been 2 years, and I had never heard whether my advice had proved effective. You've spoken to her. How is her ladyship? I asked. Dead, Movarth replied coldly, and then, responding to my shock, he added to perhaps soften the blow. She said your advice was invaluable, at least for the one vampire. When last I talked to her, she was tracking another. It killed her. Then the advice I gave her was not enough, I sighed. Why do you think it would be enough for you? I was a teacher once myself, years ago, he said. Not in a university, a trainer in the Fighters Guild, but I know that if a student doesn't ask the right questions, the teacher cannot be responsible for his failure. I intend to ask you the right questions. And that he did. For hours he asked questions and I answered what I could, but he never volunteered any information about himself. He never smiled. He only studied me with those intense eyes of his, committing every word I said to memory. Finally, I turned the questioning around. You said you were a trainer at the Fighters Guild. Are you on an assignment for them? No, he said curtly, and finally I could detect some weariness in those feverish eyes of his. I would like to continue this tomorrow night if I could. I need to get some sleep and absorb this. You sleep during the day, I smiled. To my surprise, he returned the smile, though it was more of a grimace. When tracking your prey, you adapt their habits. The next day, he did return with more questions, these ones very specific. He wanted to know about the vampires of Eastern Skyrim. I told him about the most powerful tribe, the Volkihar, paranoid and cruel, whose very breath could freeze their victims' blood in their veins. I explained to him how they lived beneath the ice of remote and haunted lakes, never venturing into the world of men except to feed. Movarth Bigwine listened carefully and asked more questions into the night, until at last he was ready to leave. I will not see you for a few days, he said, but I will return and tell you how helpful your information has been. True to his word, the man returned to my chapel shortly after midnight, 4 days later. There was a fresh scar on his cheek, but he was smiling that grim but satisfied smile of his. Your advice helped me very much, he said, but you should know that the Volkihar have an additional ability you didn't mention. They can reach through the ice of their lakes without breaking it. It was quite a nasty surprise, being grabbed from below without any warning. How remarkable, I said with a laugh, and terrifying. You're lucky you survived. I don't believe in luck. I believe in knowledge and training. Your information helped me, and my skill at melee combat sealed the bloodsucker's fate. I've never believed in weaponry of any kind, non-Samu who were indistinguishable from Bosma except when seen by candlelight, the Kirilth who could disintegrate into mist, the Yakef who swallowed men whole, the dread Telboth who preyed on children, eventually taking their place in the family, waiting patiently for years before murdering them all in their unnatural hunger. Once again, he bade me farewell, promising to return in a few weeks, and once again he returned, as he said, just after midnight. This time, Mavath had no fresh scars, but he again had new information. You were wrong about the Kirilth being unable to vaporize when pushed underwater, he said, patting my shoulder fondly. Fortunately, they cannot travel far in their mist form, and I was able to track it down. It must have surprised it fearfully. Your field knowledge is becoming impressive, I said. I should have had an acolyte like you decades ago. Now tell me, he said, of the vampires of Cyrodiil. I told him what I could. There was but one tribe in Cyrodiil, a powerful clan who had ousted all other competitors, much like the Imperials themselves had done. Their true name was unknown, lost in history, but they were experts at concealment. If they kept themselves well fed, they were indistinguishable from living persons. They were cultured, more civilized than the vampires of the provinces, preferring to feed on victims while they were asleep, unaware. They will be difficult to surprise, Mavath frowned, but I will seek one out and tell you what I learn. And then you will tell me of the vampires of High Rock and Hammerfell and elsewhere, and Blackmarsh and Morrowind and the Somerset Isles, yes. I nodded, knowing then that this man was on an eternal quest. He wouldn't be satisfied with but the barest hint of how things were. He needed to know it all. He did not return for a month, and on the night that he did, I could see his frustration and despair, though there were no lights burning in my chapel. I failed, he said, as I lit a candle. You were right, I could not find a single one. I brought the light up to my face and smiled. He was surprised, even stunned by the pallor of my flesh, the dark hunger in my ageless eyes, and the teeth. Oh yes, I think the teeth definitely surprised the man who could not afford to be surprised. I haven't fed in 72 hours, I explained, as I fell on him. He did not land the first blow, or the last. Oh, that one was really good. That was a good plot twist at the end. Wow. Okay. Next up is a book called Surfeit of Thieves. And this is by Anise Noru. This looks interesting, said Indike, his eyes narrowing to observe the black caravan making its way to the spires of the secluded castle. A gaudy alien coat of arms marked each carriage, the lacquer glistening in the light of the moons. Who do you suppose they are? They're obviously well off, smiled his partner, Haraya. Perhaps some new imperial cult dedicated to the acquisition of wealth. Go into town and find out what you can about the castle, said Indike. I'll see if I can learn anything about who these strangers are. We meet on this hill tomorrow night. Haraya had two great skills, picking locks and picking information. By dusk of the following day, she had returned to the hill. Indike joined her an hour later. The place is called Ald Olira, she explained. It dates back to the Second Era, when a collection of nobles built it to protect themselves during one of the epidemics. They didn't want any of the diseased masses to get into their midst and spread the plague, so they built up quite a sophisticated security system for the time. Of course, it's mostly fallen into ruin, but I have a good idea about what kind of locks and traps might still be operational. What did you find? I wasn't nearly so successful, frowned Indike. No one seemed to have any idea about the group, even that they were here. I was about to give up, but at the charter house I met a monk who said that masters were a hermetic group called the Order of Saint Eadnua. I talked to him for some time, this fellow named Baratheon, and it seems they're having some sort of ritual feast tonight. Are they wealthy? Asked Uriah impatiently. Embarrassingly so, according to the fellow, but they're only at the castle for tonight. I have my picks on me, winked Uriah. Opportunity has smiled on us. She drew a diagram of the castle in the dirt. The main hall and kitchen were near the front gate, and the stables and secured armory were in the back. The thieves had a system that had never failed. Uriah would find a way into the castle and collect as much loot as possible, while Indike provided the distraction. He waited until his partner had scaled the wall before rapping on the gate. Perhaps this time he would be a bard or a lost adventurer. The details were most fun to improvise. Uriah heard Indike talking to the woman who came to the gate, but she was too far away to hear the words exchanged. He was evidently successful. A moment later, she heard the door shut. The man had charm, she would give him that. Only a few of the traps and locks to the armory had been set. Undoubtedly, many of the keys had been lost in time. Whatever servants had been in charge of securing the Order's treasures had brought a few new locks to a fix. It took extra time to maneuver the intricate hasps and bolts of the new traps before proceeding to the old but still working systems, but Uriah found her heart beating with anticipation. Whatever lay beyond the door, she thought, must be of sufficient value to merit such protection. When at last the door swung quietly open, the thief found her avaricious dreams paled to reality. A mountain of golden treasure, ancient relics glimmering with untapped magicka, weaponry of matchless quality, gemstones the size of her fist, row after row of strange potions, and stacks of valuable documents and scrolls. She was so enthralled by the sight, she did not hear the man behind her approach. "You must be Lady Tressett," said the voice, and she jumped. It was a monk in a black hooded robe, intricately woven with silver and gold threads. For a moment, she could not speak. This was the sort of encounter that Indike loved, but she could think to do nothing but nod her head with what she hoped looked like certainty. "I'm afraid I'm a little lost," she stammered. "I can see that," the man laughed. "That's the armory. I'll show you the way to the dining hall. We were afraid you weren't going to arrive. The feast is nearly over." Uriah followed the monk across the courtyard to the double doors leading to the dining hall. A robe identical to the one he was wearing hung on a hook outside, and he handed it to her with a knowing smile. She slipped it on. She mimicked him as she lowered the hood over her head and entered the hall. Torches illuminated the figures around the large table. Each wore the uniform black robe that covered all features, and from the look of things, the feast was over. Empty plates, platters, and glasses filled every inch of the wood, with only the faintest spots and dribbles of the food remaining. It was a breaking of a fast, it seemed. For a moment, Uriah stopped to think about poor lost Lady Tressett, who had missed her opportunity for gluttony. The only unusual item on the table was its centerpiece, a huge golden hourglass, which was on its last minute's worth of sand. Though each person looked alike, some were sleeping, some were chatting merrily to one another, and one was playing a lute. Indike's lute, she noticed, and then noticed Indike's ring on the man's finger. Uriah was suddenly grateful for the anonymity of the hood. Perhaps Indike would not realize that it was she, and that she had blundered. "Tressett," said the young man to the assembled, who turned as one to her and burst into applause. The conscious members of the Order arose to kiss her hand and introduce themselves. Nidla, Swelek, Kyla. The names got stranger. Tonyop, Tillits, Noyatarap. She could not help laughing. "I understand. It's all backwards. Your real name voice taking on an unpleasant mocking quality. "My name isn't Dresset," she mumbled, gripping Indike's arm. "I'm sorry, partner, we need to go." The last crumb of sand fell in the hourglass as the man pulled back his hood. It was not Indike. It was not even human, but a stretched grotesquerie of a man with hungry eyes and a wide mouth filled with tusk-like fangs. Haraya fell back into the chair of the figure they called Esruok to Sirif. His hood fell open, revealing the pallid, bloodless face of Indike. As she began to scream, they fell on her. In her last living moments, Haraya finally spelled Dresset backwards. Can you work out what that is saying backwards? Now that is one of my favourite spooky Skyrim stories. It's, really, really good. Now, our final book for today is probably one of my favourite stories in Skyrim. The first time I read it, I was genuinely blown away. So this is 2 volumes, and it is Palla. It is written by Voin Misted. Palla. I remember when I first heard that name, not long ago at all. It was at a Tales and Tallows ball at a very fine estate west of Mir Korup, to which I and my fellow Mages Guild initiates had found ourselves unexpectedly invited. Truth be told, we needn't have been too surprised. There were very few other noble families in Mir Korup. The region had its halcyon days as a resort for the wealthy far back in the Second Era, and on reflection, it was only appropriate to have sorcerers and wizards present at a supernatural holiday. Not that we were anything more exotic than students at a small, non-exclusive charter house of the guild, but like I said, there was paucity of other choices available. For close to a year, the only home I had known was the rather ramshackle, if sprawling grounds of the Mir Korup Mages Guild. My only companions were my fellow initiates, most of which only tolerated me, and the masters, whose bitterness at being a backwater guild prompted never-ending abuse. Immediately, the school of illusion had attracted me. The magister who taught us recognized me as an apt pupil who loved not only the spells of the science, but their philosophical underpinnings. There was something about the idea of warping the imperceptible energies of light, sound, and mind that appealed to my nature. Not for me the flashy schools of destruction and alteration, the holy schools of restoration and conjuration, the practical schools of alchemy and enchantment, or the chaotic school of mysticism. No, I was never so pleased as to take an ordinary object and by a little magic make it seem something other than what it was. It would have taken more imagination than I had to apply that philosophy to my monotonous life. After the morning's lessons, we were assigned tasks before our evening classes. Mine had been to clean out the study of a recently deceased resident of the guild and categorize his clutter of spellbooks, charms, and incunabula. It was a lonely and tedious appointment. Magister Tendixus was an inveterate collector of worthless junk, but I was reprimanded any time I threw something away of the least possible value. Gradually, I learned enough to deliver each of his belongings to the appropriate department. Potions of healing to the Magisters of Restoration, books on physical phenomena to the Magisters of Alteration, herbs and minerals to the alchemists, and soul gems and bound items to the enchanters. After one delivery to the enchanters, I was leaving with my customary lack of appreciation when Magister Ilther called me back. "Boy," said the portly old man, handing me back one item. "Destroy this." It was a small black disc covered with runes with a ring of red-orange gems like bones circling its sorry, Magister, I stammered. I thought it was something you'd be interested in. Take it to the Great Flame and destroy it, he barked, turning his back on me. You never brought it here. My interest was piqued because I knew the only thing that would make him react in such a way. Necromancy. I went back to Magister Tendix's chamber and pored through his notes, looking for any reference to the disc. Unfortunately, most of the notes had been written in a strange code that I was powerless to decipher. I was so fascinated by the mystery that I nearly arrived late for my evening class in enchantment, taught by Magister Iltha himself. For the next several weeks, I divided my time categorizing the general debris and making my deliveries, and researching the disc. I came to understand that my instinct was correct. The disc was a genuine necromantic artifact. Though I couldn't understand most of the Magister's notes, I determined that he thought it to be a means of resurrecting a loved one from the grave. Sadly, the time came when the chamber had been categorized and cleared, and I was given another assignment, assisting in the stables of the guild's menagerie. At least finally, I was working with some of my fellow initiates, and had the opportunity of meeting the common folk and nobles who came to the guild on various errands. Thus was I employed when we were all invited to the Tales and Tallows ball. If the expected glamour of the evening were not enough, our hostess was reputed to be a young, rich, unmarried orphan from Hammerfell. Only a month or two before had she moved to our desolate, wooded corner of the Imperial Province to reclaim an old family manor house and grounds. The initiates of the guild gossiped like old women about the mysterious young lady's past, what had happened to her parents, why she had left or been driven from her homeland. Her name was Betaniki, and that was all we knew. We wore our robes of initiation with pride as we arrived for the ball. At the enormous marble foyer, a servant announced each of our names as if we were royalty, and we strutted into the midst of the revellers with great puffery. Of course, we were then promptly ignored by one and all. In essence, we were unimportant figures to lend some thickness to the ball. Background characters. The important people pushed through us with perfect politeness. There was old Lady Chowderer discussing diplomatic appointments to Balmora with the Duke of Rimfarlin. An orc warlord entertained a giggling princess with tales of pillage. 3 of the guild magisters worried with 3 painfully thin noble spinsters about the haunting of Daggerfall. Intrigues at the imperial and various royal courts were analysed, gently mocked, fretted over, toasted, dismissed, evaluated, mitigated, admonished, subverted. No one looked our way, even when we were right next to them. It was as if my skill at illusion had somehow rendered us all invisible. I took my flagon out to the terrace. The moons were doubled, equally luminous in the sky and in the enormous reflecting pool that stretched out into the garden. The white marble statuary lining the sides of the pool caught the fiery glow and seemed to burn like torches in the night. The sight was so otherworldly that I was mesmerized by it and the strange red-guard figures immortalized in stone. Our hostess had made her home there so recently that some of the sculptures were still wrapped in sheets that billowed and swayed in the gentle breeze. I don't know how long I stared before I realized I wasn't alone. She was so small and so dark, not only in her skin but in her clothing, that I nearly took her for a shadow. When she turned to me, I saw that she was very beautiful and young, not more than 17. "Are you our hostess?" I finally asked. "Yes," she smiled, blushing. "But I'm ashamed to admit that I'm very bad at it. I should be inside with my new neighbours, but I think we have very little in common." It's been made abundantly clear that they hope I have nothing in common with them either, I laughed. When I'm a little higher than an initiate in the Mages Guild, they might see me as more of an equal. I don't understand the concept of equality in Cyrodiil yet, she frowned. In my culture, you proved your worth, not just expected it. My parents both were great warriors, as I hope to be. Her eyes went out to the lawn, to the statues. Do the sculptures represent your parents? That's my father Priam there, she said, gesturing to a life-sized representation of a massively built man, unashamedly naked, gripping another warrior by the throat and preparing to decapitate him with an outstretched blade. It was clearly a realistic depiction. Priam's face was plain, even slightly ugly, with a low forehead, a mass of tangled hair, stubble on his cheeks, even a slight gap in his teeth, which no sculpture would surely have invented except to do justice to his model's true idiosyncrasies. And your mother? I asked, pointing to a nearby statue of a proud, rather squat warrior woman in a mantilla and scarf, holding a child. Oh no, she laughed. That was my uncle's old nurse. Mother's statue still has a sheet over it. I don't know what prompted me to insist that we unveil the statue that she pointed to. In all likelihood, it was nothing but fate and a selfish desire to continue the conversation. I was afraid that if I did not give her a project, she would feel the need to return to the party, and I would be alone again. At first she was reluctant. She had not yet made up her mind whether the statues would suffer in the wet, sometimes cold, Cyrodiilic climate. Perhaps all should be covered, she reasoned. It may be that she was merely making conversation, and was reluctant as I was to end the standoff, and be that much closer to having to return to the party. In a few minutes' time, we tore the tarp from the statue of Betaniki's mother. That is when my life changed forevermore. She was an untamed spirit of nature, screaming in a struggle with a misshapen, monstrous figure in black marble. Her gorgeous long fingers were raking across the creature's face. The monster's talons gripped her right breast in a sort of caress that prefaces a mortal wound. Its legs and hers wound around one another in a battle that was a dance. I felt annihilated. This lithe but formidable woman was beautiful beyond all superficial standards. Whoever had sculpted it had somehow captured not only a face and figure of a goddess, but her power and will. She was both tragic and triumphant. I fell instantly and fatally in love with her. I had not even noticed when Kellen, one of my fellow initiates who was leaving the party, came up behind us. Apparently, I had whispered the word magnificent, because I heard Betaniki reply as if miles away. Yes, it is magnificent. That's why I was afraid of exposing it to the elements. Then I heard, clearly, like a stone breaking water, Kellen. Mara, preserve me. That must be Palla. Then you heard of my mother? Asked Betaniki, turning his way. I hail from Wayrest, practically on the border to Hammerfell. I don't think there's anyone who hasn't heard of your mother and her great heroism, ridding the land of that abominable beast. She died in that struggle, didn't she? Yes, said the girl sadly, but so too did the creature. For a moment we were all silent. I don't remember anything more of that night. Somehow I knew I was invited to dine the next evening, but my mind and heart had been entirely and forevermore arrested by the statue. I returned back to the guild, but my dreams were fevered and brought me no rest. Everything seemed diffused by white light, except for one beautiful, fearsome woman, Palla. And now onto Palla Volume 2. Palla. Palla. The name burned in my heart. I found myself whispering it in my studies, even when I tried to concentrate on something the magister was saying. My lips would silently purse to voice the pal, and tongue lightly flick to form the la, as if I were kissing her spirit before me. It was madness in every way, except that I knew it was madness. I knew I was in love. I knew she was a noble red-guard woman, a fierce warrior more beautiful than the stars. I knew her young daughter Betaniki had taken possession of a manor house near the guild, and that she liked me, perhaps was even infatuated. I knew Palla had fought a terrible beast and killed it. I knew Palla was dead. As I say, I knew it was madness, and by that I knew I could not be mad, but I also knew that I must return to Betaniki's years, I would not have had so many opportunities. In her innocence, unaware of my sick obsession, she welcomed my company. We would talk for hours, laughing, and every time we would take a walk to the reflecting pond, where I would always stop breathless before the sculpture of her mother. It's a marvellous tradition you have, preserving the figures of your ancestors at their finest moment, I said, feeling her curious eyes on me. And the craftsmanship is without parallel. You wouldn't believe me, laughed the girl, but it was a bit of a scandal when my great-grandfather began the custom. We Redguards hold a great reverence for our families, but we are warriors, not artists. He hired a travelling artist to create the first statues, and everyone admired them until it was revealed that the artist was an elf, an Ultima from the Somerset Isle. Scandal. It was, absolutely, Betaniki nodded seriously. The idea that a pompous, wicked elf's hands had formed these figures of noble Redguard warriors was unthinkable, profane, irreverent, everything bad you can imagine. But my great-grandfather's heart was in the beauty of it, and his philosophy of using the best to honour the best passed down to us all. I would not have even considered having a lesser artist create the statues of my parents, even if it would have been more allegiant to my culture. They're all exquisite, I said, but you like the one of my mother most of all, she smiled. I see you look at it, even when you seem to be looking at the others. It's my favourite also. Would you tell me more about her? I asked, trying to keep my voice light and conversational. Oh, she would have said she was nothing extraordinary, but she was, the girl said, picking a flower from the garden. My father died when I was quite young, and she had so many roles to fill, but she did them all effortlessly. We have a great many business interests, and she was brilliant at managing everything. Certainly better than I am now. All it took was her smile, and everyone obeyed, and those that didn't paid dearly. She was very witty and charming, but a formidable force when the need arose for her to fight. Hundreds of battles, but I can never remember a moment of feeling neglected or unloved. I literally thought she was too strong for death. Stupid, I know, but when she went to battle that horrible creature, that freak from a mad wizard's laboratory, I never even thought she would not return. She was kind to her friends and ruthless to her enemies. What more can one say about a woman than that? Poor Betaniki's eyes teared up with remembrance. What sort of villain was I to goad her so, in order to satisfy my perverted longings? Sheogorath could never have conflicted a mortal man more than me. I found myself both weeping and filled with desire. Palla not only looked like a goddess, but from her daughter's story, she was one. That night, while undressing for bed, I rediscovered the black disc I had stolen from Magister Tendix's office weeks before. I'd half forgotten about its existence, that mysterious necromantic artifact which the mage believed could resurrect a dead love. Almost by pure instinct, I found myself placing the disc on my heart and whispering, Palla. A momentary chill filled my chamber. My breath hung in the air in a mist before dissipating. Frightened, I dropped the disc. It took a moment before my reason returned, and with it the inescapable conclusion. The artifact could fulfill my desire. Until the early morning hours, I tried to raise my mistress from the chains of oblivion, but it was of no use. I was no necromancer. I entertained thoughts of how to ask one of the magisters to help me, but I remembered how Magister Iltha had bid me to destroy it. They would expel me from the guild if I went to them and destroy the disc themselves, and with it, my only key to bringing my love to me. I was in my usual semi-torpid condition the next day in classes. Magister Iltha himself was lecturing on his specialty, the School of Enchantment. He was a dull speaker with a monotone voice, but suddenly I felt as if every shadow had left the room and I was in a palace of light. When most persons think of my particular science, they think of the process of invention, the infusing of charms and spells into objects, the creation of a magical blade, perhaps, or a ring, but the skilled enchanter is also a catalyst. the same mind that can create something new can also provoke greater power from something old. A ring that can generate warmth for a novice on the hand of such a talent can bake a forest black. The fat man chuckled. Not that I'm advocating that. Leave that for the school of destruction. That week, all the initiates were asked to choose a field of specialization. All were surprised when I turned my back on my old darling, the school of illusion. It seemed ridiculous to me that I had ever entertained an affection for such superficial charms. All my intellect was now focused on the school of enchantment, the means by which I could free the power of the disc. For months thereafter, I barely slept. A few hours a week I'd spend with Betaniki and my statue to give myself strength and inspiration. All the rest of my time was spent with Magister Iltha or his assistants, learning everything I could about enchantment. They taught me how to taste the deepest levels of magicka stored within an object. A simple spell cast once, no matter how skillfully and no matter how spectacularly, is ephemeral of the present, what it is and no more, sighed Magister Iltha. But placed in a home, it develops into an almost living energy, maturing and ripening, so only its surface is touched when an unskilled hand wields it. You must consider yourself a miner, digging deeper to pull forth the very heart of gold. Every night when the laboratory closed, I practiced what I had learned. I could feel my power grow, and with it, the power of the disc. Whispering Palla, I delved into the artifact, feeling every slight nick that marked the runes and every facet of the gemstones. At times, I was so close to her, I felt hands touching mine. But something dark and bestial, the reality of death, I suppose, would always break across the dawning of my dreams. With it came an overwhelming rotting odour, which the initiates in the chambers next to mine began to complain about. Something must have crawled into the floorboards and died, I offered lamely. Magister Iltha praised my scholarship and allowed me the use of his laboratory after hours to further my studies. Yet no matter what I learned, Palla seemed scarcely closer. One night, it all ended. I was swaying in a deep ecstasy, moaning her name, the disc bruising my chest, when a sudden lightning flash through the window broke my concentration. A tempest of furious rain roared over Mir Korup. I went to close the shutters, and when I returned to my table, I found that the disc had shattered. I broke into hysterical sobs and then laughter. It was too much for my fragile mind to bear such a loss after so much time and study. The next day and the day after, I spent in my bed, burning with a fever. Had it not been a mage's guild with so many healers, I likely would have died. As it was, I provided an excellent study for the budding young scholars. When at last I was well enough to walk, I went to visit Betaniki. She was charming as always, never once commenting on my appearance, which must have been ghastly. Finally, I gave her a reason to worry when I politely but firmly declined to walk with her along the reflecting pool. "But you love looking at the statuary," she exclaimed. I felt that I owed her the truth, and much more. "Dear lady, I love more than the statuary. I love your mother. She is all I've been able to think about for months now, ever since you and I first removed the tub from that blessed sculpture. I don't know what you think of me now, but I've been obsessed with learning how to bring her back from the dead." Betaniki stared at me, eyes wide. Finally, she spoke. "I think you need to leave now. I don't know if this is a terrible jest. Believe me, I wish it were. You see, I failed. I don't know why. It could not have been that my love wasn't strong enough, because no man had a stronger love. Perhaps my skills as an enchanter are not masterful, but it wasn't from lack of study. I could feel my voice rise and knew I was beginning to rant, but I could not hold back. Perhaps the fault lay in that your mother never met me, but I think that only the caster's love is taken into account in the necromantic spell. I don't know what it was. Maybe that horrible creature, the monster that killed her, cast some sort of curse on her with its dying breath. I failed. I don't know why." With a surprising burst of speed and strength ever so small a lady, Betaniki shoved herself against me. She screamed, "Get out!" and I fled out the door. Before she slammed the door shut, I offered my pathetic apologies. "I'm so sorry, Betaniki, but consider that I wanted to bring your mother back to you. It's madness, I know, but there is only one thing that's certain in my life, and that's that I love Palla." The door was nearly shut, but the girl opened it a crack to ask tremulously, "You love whom?" "Palla," I cried to the gods. "My mother," she whispered angrily, "was named Xalis. Palla was the monster." I stared at the closed door for Mara knows how much time, and then began the long walk back to the Mages Guild. My memory searched through the minutiae to the tales and Talos nights so long ago, when I first beheld the statue and first heard the name of my love. That Breton initiate Gellin had spoken. He was behind me. Was he recognizing the beast and not the lady? I turned the lonely bend that intersected with the outskirts of Mir Corrup, and a large shadow rose from the ground where it had been sitting, waiting for me. "Palla," I groaned. "Palla." "Kiss me," it howled. And that brings my story up to the present moment. Love is red, like blood.